Clint Eastwood was 22 years old, broke, and furious when he walked into that dive bar in Oakland on a Friday night in December 1952. He'd just been discharged from the Army 2 months earlier, had exactly $47 to his name, and no idea what he was going to do with his life. The Korean War was over for him, but the real battle, figuring out who the hell he was supposed to be, had just begun. The bar was called Mickey's Tavern, a grimy hole-in-the-wall on San Pablo Avenue, where longshoremen, factory workers, and ex-military guys went to drink cheap beer and forget their problems. Clint wasn't there to forget. He was there because he was angry at the world and looking for something, anything, to make him feel alive again. What he found instead were 3 Navy sailors, drunk and loud, harassing a young woman at the bar. And what happened in the next 10 minutes would teach Clint Eastwood a lesson about violence, consequences, and the man he wanted to become. A lesson that would shape every character he ever played, every film he ever made, every choice he ever made about who Clint Eastwood would be. This is the story of the night young Clint learned that being tough isn't about winning fights. It's about knowing when to walk away. And sometimes, it's about knowing when you can't. To understand who Clint Eastwood was in December 1952, you need to understand what the previous 2 years had done to him. In 1950, at age 20, Clint had been drafted into the Army during the Korean War. He'd been working odd jobs around Oakland, swimming instructor at a community pool, logger up in Oregon for a summer, gas station attendant, just drifting, trying to figure out what to do with his life. The draft notice came and Clint reported to Fort Ord in Monterey for basic training. He expected to be shipped to Korea within months, expected to end up in frozen trenches, fighting Chinese soldiers, maybe dying on some godforsaken hill that would be forgotten a week later. But fate intervened. During processing, someone noticed Clint was an excellent swimmer and had lifeguard experience. Instead of infantry, he was assigned to Fort Ord as a swimming instructor. While guys his age were dying in Korea, Clint spent his military service teaching soldiers how to swim in sunny California. He felt guilty about it. Survivor's guilt, they call it now. Why did he get to stay safe while other men died? What made him special? Nothing. Just dumb luck. A notation on a form that said, "Experienced swimmer." That changed everything. Then came the plane crash in September 1951. The engine failure, the ditching in the Pacific, 6 hours in freezing water waiting to die. That changed something fundamental in Clint. He'd looked death in the eye and survived. And when you survive something like that, when you're 21 years old and you should be dead but you're not, it does something to your brain. It makes you fearless in some ways, reckless in others. When Clint was discharged from the Army in October 1952, he came home to Oakland with no plan, no direction, and a gnawing restlessness that made him feel like he was crawling out of his skin. His parents wanted him to get a normal job, maybe work in the steel mill with his father, settle down, get married, have kids, live a normal life. But Clint didn't want normal. Normal felt like death. He'd survived the plane crash for a reason, he thought, though he didn't know what that reason was yet. He just knew he couldn't spend the next 40 years in a factory or an office, punching a clock, waiting to die of old age. So he drifted, took a job as a construction worker for a few weeks, quit when the foreman pissed him off, worked at a gas station for a month, quit when a customer got in his face about something stupid. He was angry all the time, though he couldn't articulate why. Angry at the world, at himself, at the uncertainty of everything. His girlfriend at the time, a woman named Maggie Johnson who he'd met at a blind date that summer, was getting frustrated with him. "You need to figure out what you want, Clint," she'd tell him. "You can't just drift forever." But Clint didn't know what he wanted. He just knew what he didn't want. And that Friday night in December, what he didn't want was to watch 3 drunk sailors harass a woman while everyone else in the bar pretended not to notice. Clint had been sitting at the bar for about 20 minutes, nursing a beer he couldn't really afford, when the sailors came in. 3 of them, probably on shore leave from the naval base in Alameda, already drunk, loud, looking for trouble or fun or both. They spotted a young woman sitting alone at the end of the bar, probably mid-20s, dark hair, wearing a waitress uniform like she'd just gotten off shift. She was minding her own business, drinking a Coke, probably decompressing from a long day of dealing with customers. The sailors surrounded her. Not threatening at first, just friendly drunk, asking her name, offering to buy her a drink, making jokes. The woman smiled politely, but you could see the discomfort in her eyes. She wasn't interested. She just wanted to be left alone. But the sailors weren't picking up on the signals. Or they didn't care. They got closer, more insistent. One of them, a big guy with red hair and a neck like a tree trunk, put his hand on her shoulder. Come on, sweetheart. One drink. We're heroes, just back from Korea. Don't we deserve a little company? The woman removed his hand. I said no thank you. Please leave me alone. The redhead's smile disappeared. That's not very patriotic of you. We fight for your freedom, and you can't even have a drink with us. His buddies laughed. They were getting aggressive now, feeding off each other's energy. One of them, a wiry guy with a sharp face, leaned in close to the woman. What? You think you're too good for us? The woman stood up, trying to leave, but the redhead blocked her path. Where you going? We're just having a conversation. That's when Clint set down his beer and stood up. The smart thing would have been to call the bartender over, let him handle it, or walk away, mind his own business, not get involved. Clint had no relationship with this woman. He didn't know her. This wasn't his problem. But Clint had spent 2 years feeling powerless, first in the army where he had to follow orders, then in the Pacific Ocean where he'd been helpless against the cold and the waves, then back home where he felt lost and directionless. And right now, in this moment, he had the power to do something. He walked over to the group. He was 6 feet 4 inches, lean but solid from his military training and construction work. The sailors were big, but Clint had height on all of them. The lady said she wants to be left alone. Clint said quietly. The redhead turned to look at him, sizing him up. This ain't your business, buddy. I'm making it my business. The bar had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. The bartender, a grizzled old man named Frank who'd seen 1,000 bar fights, was reaching for the phone to call the cops. The sharp-faced sailor laughed. Look at this guy. Thinks he's a tough guy. You Army. You look Army. Was Army. Now I'm just a guy telling you to leave her alone. The redhead stepped closer to Clint, getting in his face. Clint could smell the whiskey on his breath. Oh, what? What are you going to do about it? This was the moment where Clint could back down, make a joke, defuse the situation. Or he could escalate. Every cell in his body was screaming at him to hit this guy, to release all the pent-up anger and frustration of the past 2 months into this red-headed sailor's smug face. I'm giving you one chance to walk away, Clint said, his voice low and calm. Take it. The redhead smiled. I don't think so. And then he threw a punch. Clint saw it coming a mile away. The redhead was drunk, his movements slow and telegraphed. Clint ducked easily and drove his fist into the sailor's solar plexus. The air exploded out of the redhead's lungs, and he doubled over, gasping. The other 2 sailors reacted immediately. The sharp-faced one came at Clint from the left, the third sailor, a stocky guy with a boxer's build, from the right. They were trying to corner him, overwhelm him with numbers. But Clint had been in fights before. Growing up poor in Depression-era California, you learned to fight or you got walked over. And his time in the army had taught him how to stay calm under pressure. He sidestepped the sharp-faced sailor and caught him with an elbow to the temple as he stumbled past. The sailor went down hard, hitting the floor and staying there. 1 down. The stocky sailor was better, knew how to fight. He came in low, trying to tackle Clint, get him on the ground where size wouldn't matter as much. But Clint sprawled, kept his base, and drove his knee into the sailor's face as he came in. There was a sickening crunch. The sailor fell back, blood streaming from his broken nose. 2 down. The redhead had recovered his breath and was coming back for more, angrier now, humiliated. He charged at Clint like a bull, arms wide, trying to grab him in a bear hug. Clint waited until the last second, then pivoted and let the redhead's momentum carry him past. As he went by, Clint grabbed the back of his head and helped him along, right into the jukebox. The redhead hit the jukebox face first, with a tremendous crash. The music skipped, then stopped. The redhead slid to the floor, unconscious. 3 down. The whole fight had lasted maybe 30 seconds. 3 sailors, all of them bigger and younger than they looked, All of them now on the floor, or bleeding, or both. And Clint standing in the middle of it, breathing hard, knuckles bleeding, feeling nothing. That was the weird part. He didn't feel victorious, or proud, or tough. He just felt empty. The woman he defended was staring at him with wide eyes, half grateful, half terrified. The other patrons in the bar were silent, shocked. Frank the bartender was on the phone with the cops, reporting a fight. And Clint looked around at what he'd done. 3 men injured, one possibly seriously, and felt a wave of disgust wash over him. Not at the sailors. At himself. This wasn't who he wanted to be. This wasn't the reason he survived the plane crash. To get in bar fights? To hurt people? What was the point? You okay? Clint asked the woman. She nodded, still too shocked to speak. You should go home, Clint said gently. Cops are coming. You don't want to be here for that. The woman grabbed her purse and left quickly, casting one last look at Clint before disappearing into the night. Frank hung up the phone and looked at Clint. Cops will be here in 5 minutes. Those are Navy boys. This is going to be trouble. Clint looked at the 3 sailors. The redhead was starting to come around, groaning. The stocky one was sitting up, holding his broken nose. The sharp-faced one was still out cold. I'm sorry, Frank, Clint said. I'll pay for the jukebox. With what money? You're broke. Clint had no answer for that. The cops arrived 4 minutes later. 2 Oakland PD officers, both of them looking tired and annoyed at having to deal with another bar fight on a Friday night. They separated everyone, got statements from witnesses, called an ambulance for the sharp-faced sailor who still hadn't fully regained consciousness. The redhead, once he could talk again, wanted Clint arrested. That son of a bitch attacked us. Unprovoked. We were just having a drink, and he went crazy. But the witnesses told a different story. The woman had been harassed. Clint had intervened. The sailors had thrown the first punch. It was self-defense, clear as day. The cops talked to each other in low voices, then came over to Clint. You're free to go, one of them said. But let me give you some advice, son. I don't care if you're in the right. Fighting with Navy boys means trouble. The MPs don't like civilians beating up their guys. You'd be smart to make yourself scarce for a while. Clint nodded. Yes, sir. He left the bar and walked out into the cold December night. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off, reality setting in. He'd beaten up 3 men. He could have killed one of them. That sharp-faced sailor had hit his head pretty hard when he went down. What if he didn't wake up? What if Clint had just committed manslaughter over a bar fight? He walked for hours that night, through the streets of Oakland, thinking about his life, about who he was and who he wanted to be. He thought about the plane crash, about treading water in the Pacific, thinking he was going to die. He'd promised himself, then, that if he survived, he'd make something of his life. He wouldn't waste it. And here he was, 2 months later, broke and directionless, getting into bar fights like some thug. This wasn't it. This wasn't the life he was supposed to live. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Clint found himself at the Oakland docks, watching the ships being loaded and unloaded, watching men work through the night. Honest work. Hard work. But not work that made you feel alive. And that's when it hit him. The realization that would change everything. He didn't want a normal job. He didn't want a factory or an office. But he also didn't want to be a guy who solved problems with his fists, who drifted from fight to fight, bar to bar, until someone finally got lucky and hurt him worse than he hurt them. He wanted to be someone, to do something that mattered, something that used this restless energy, this need for something more. He thought about the movies he'd seen, the westerns, the adventures, the heroes on screen who were larger than life. And he thought maybe that was it. Maybe that was the thing he'd been looking for. It was a crazy idea. He had no training, no connections, no experience. He was just a tall kid from Oakland with a high school education and a stint in the Army. What chance did he have in Hollywood? But then again, what chance did he have of surviving 6 hours in the Pacific Ocean? And he'd done that. The next morning, Saturday, Clint went to see Maggie. She opened the door and immediately noticed his swollen knuckles. What happened to your hands? I got in a fight last night. 3 Navy guys. Maggie sighed. Clint, I know. But listen, I figured something out. I'm going to Los Angeles. I'm going to try to be an actor." Maggie stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "An actor? Clint, you can't just decide to be an actor. You don't know anything about acting." "I don't know anything about anything. But I know I can't stay here. I can't keep doing this, drifting, fighting, wasting my life. I need to try something. And this feels right. This feels crazy. Maybe. But I'm doing it anyway." Maggie looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "If you're going to Los Angeles, I'm coming with you." "Maggie, I don't have any money. I don't have a plan. I don't even know where I'll live." "Then we'll figure it out together. Because I'm not letting you do this alone." They got married 3 weeks later, a quick ceremony at a justice of the peace, and moved to Los Angeles in January 1953 with $200 between them and a dream that seemed impossible. Clint never went back to Mickey's Tavern, never saw those 3 sailors again, never found out if the sharp-faced one was okay, though he checked the Oakland Tribune obituaries for weeks afterward and found nothing, so presumably the guy survived. But that night changed everything. It was the last time Clint Eastwood solved a problem with violence outside of a movie screen. It was the night he realized that being tough wasn't about hurting people. It was about having the courage to chase something impossible. Years later, when Clint was famous, a journalist asked him if he'd ever been in a real fight. Clint thought about that December night in 1952 and smiled slightly. "Once," he said, "a long time ago. I won the fight, but I didn't feel like a winner. That's when I knew fighting wasn't for me. I'd rather pretend to fight in movies." The journalist laughed, thinking Clint was joking. But he wasn't. That night at Mickey's Tavern, 22-year-old Clint Eastwood had stood over 3 unconscious sailors and felt empty. And in that emptiness, he'd found clarity. This wasn't who he wanted to be. He wanted to be someone else. Someone better. Someone who could be tough on screen, but kind in real life. Someone who could embody strength without needing to prove it in bar fights. He wanted to be Clint Eastwood. Not the kid from Oakland who got in fights, but the icon, the legend, the man who would define masculinity for a generation. And it all started the night he walked away from Mickey's Tavern, hands bleeding, heart heavy, knowing that he'd just fought his last real fight. Everything after that would be pretend. And somehow, that pretend would become more real, more meaningful, more lasting than any punch he ever threw. That's the night young Clint Eastwood became the Clint Eastwood. Not when he got famous, not when he made his first movie, but when he stood in a dive bar in Oakland and realized that violence wasn't strength. Walking away was strength, and having the courage to chase an impossible dream, that was the toughest thing of all.